Hey, I'm Josie.
And I'm Vickie. Today we're going to be taking conflict little by slowly.
Cute song. Um, so this week we wanted to talk about conflict in the sense of are you still dancing?
I thought it was fun. I got a little song in my head. I was singing "Don't Stop Chasing Waterfalls." So I was like, "Don't stop chasing." Insert non-copyrighted song here. So it'd be like some random iMovie song.
Oh my god. But yes, today we're going to be talking about conflict and talking about the way we have approached conflict in our pasts. Just because conflict can just seem like such like a negative. Um, and then we're also going to be spinning that around and then talking about conflict resolution and seeing how conflict can be a positive, and within that talking about peace circles, which is a part of conflict resolution. So that'll be our train of thought for today. Hopefully we stick to it.
Yeah. I'm excited about this topic because I have notoriously within myself and to my family been really poor with conflict resolution. And I know I've said this in the past, just to the world and to you, Jocelyn, but I've also said it in the podcast. I think it was the very first episode where I said that being friends with you has given me a lot of helpful tools on conflict resolution. So I'm excited to talk about this because this is kind of your forte, and I have thoughts, but you've got all the important thoughts.
um, yeah, that makes me a little nervous, but we got this.
Hi.
Huh?
Wasn't your whole minor in conflict something?
It was in peace justice and conflict studies. Yes, I have a lot of books still.
Yep. There you go.
Still, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, so I guess to start with conflict and how we have handled conflict. So even with that minor that I've held, I still struggle with seeking out like positive conflict resolution. Just because I am my brain and my emotions are really quick, and so I respond with that towards the person that I'm feeling conflict from. And most of the time when I'm feeling conflict, like I think fortunate enough to say that like I don't tend to have like that big of conflicts, but it'll just be like, oh wow, this person said this in the tone that like bothered me, and then I'll just take that into a whole bigger thing. Um, when really it can just be as simple as being like, oh, don't read too much into it, Jocelyn. But me being me, I read too much into it. And then I make it a conflict, and I guess an interpersonal conflict for myself. So I think that's the thing that I struggle with the most is just figuring out those that interpersonal conflict and like those emotions that I hold. Um, but yeah, I will say that when it comes to conflict with other people, I feel like I either go too much into like the whole like niceness, like, oh wait, no, you go ahead speak. No, you go ahead speak. And it just like it becomes like it's an argument, but it's a really nice argument. And it just feels so weird afterwards. I don't know how to explain it. And then there are other times when I am engaging in conflict, and again my emotions and responses are just straight off my head, and I'll say it out loud, and then I'm like, maybe I shouldn't have said that, like the moment after, and I'll be like, oh, I realize now that I shouldn't have said that. Like I'll realize it as I'm speaking, and I'm like, maybe think next time.
Yeah. I have a similar relationship to conflict. I often read too much into people's body language, and I don't trust that they're not trying to be combative. Like I have a habit of thinking that, specifically with my sister, and this might be just a sister thing, is that I'll think that she's giving me attitude, or I'll think that I saw her rolling her eyes or something, and then I'll turn it into an argument because I don't trust that she's not doing it, even if she is. So something that we've definitely worked on is just taking each other for our word. Like if she says she doesn't have an attitude, if she says she's not mad at me, then I'll take it. If I say that I'm not in a bad mood and that I'm not giving her attitude, then she needs to take it. And it's something that like is obviously like a day by day thing because we both have attitudes. But it's something that like we're actively working on. So yeah. But I too, I am very, what is that word? Reactive.
Oh my gosh, that's the word.
Yeah, I'm very
Not the way not the way I kept like giving the definition of reactive instead of just saying. But yeah, I feel like it could be really hard to like not be reactive because it requires a lot of maybe not emotional energy, but just like I guess it requires you well, one, it requires you to want to handle the conflict in a non-negative way, and then it also requires you to be like really intentional with like your thought, and it's like, okay, do I need space to not be reactive, or like how do I not get carried away with this in this very moment? um
Yeah. And I also think that I think for me and in a lot of situations it does take a lot of situations in general that I see like people going crazy on the internet being super reactive. I think it takes a lot of trust in the other person too, that they weren't being um really intentional in hurting you in that way. So if they've said something that's offended you, or if they'd said something that you took as offensive, just knowing that this person isn't like being super malicious, which I think takes a lot of trust and empathy in like you as a person. Try to put yourself in that other person's shoes and understand why and how they're able to say what they're saying to you, and like why they would even go about saying it in that way, which I think is important because tone matters a lot and I think intent matters a lot. So I think it's all wrapped up in that.
Definitely agree with that, and I think that just like takes a lot of maturity and like a lot of, again, we're being like having to think through and be like, yeah, this person, like I have my shit, this person has their shit too, and they're probably responding to me because they read the situation differently or other experiences that they've had.
Yeah.
And it can be hard. I'm not like, it's not, I don't think it's easy to engage in conflict in a way that's not going to hurt both people, but once you know how to do it, you can start, and hopefully becomes a practice that just gets used in your everyday life. But know that it's like it takes work and it takes a lot of intentionality. Yeah.
What do you think is like the best conflict resolution that you've seen?
Like that I've seen play out, or
Yeah, either it play out or like happen to you directly. Like what, like vaguely, because you don't need to like divulge a bunch of personal information.
yeah.
What vaguely was the issue, and then how do you think that conflict resolved in a really like healthy way?
It's a good question. I like this question. So I've seen this from my dad, and I don't know what work my dad has been doing necessarily. I just know that he's also like the way he responds and the way we engage in conflict now, it has a very much kind of like he 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 responds to me with a conflict resolution kind of framework now. Um, and so there are times where I feel myself getting worked up because I get worked up over like being late or him being late or just like time and stuff like that. And and I think most recently like I was like on the phone with him, like it was, I think it was like a year ago, he was like visiting and I was getting worked up and he can like see it and like he could hear it because I was like getting ready to cry because I just didn't know what to do with my emotions. And so and then he was like, what's wrong, like why do you want to cry? And so then I was like trying to explain, and I was like again rambling and like getting ready to yell, and he just like responded to me, he continued to respond to me in a really like cool tone. And then when I explained why I was upset, he was just kind of like, okay, like I understand why you're upset right now, but like no, like for me, like, and he just kind of explained how like it was gonna be okay if he was like a little bit late, and that he's sorry that he didn't communicate it, and that's kind of how we ended that. And I was really surprised because I was like, I'm still upset, and he was like, well, why are you upset? And I was like, because I was ready to argue with you, and you didn't give me that. And I don't. It's such a weird feeling to like because I had all this emotion pent up and I was ready to like argue with him, and that's not what he gave me, and it kind of just like set me aback a little bit. And so I think that's a place of conflict resolution where again I was not displaying that, but it was my dad, and I felt like the tone that he was setting very much influenced the way I was responding, and I felt myself starting to like wind down and being like, well, why am I going to yell at someone who isn't ready to yell at me?
Right, yeah.
And so I think about that, and then after that I think a big part of conflict resolution is like making that change. And so he was like, I'll communicate with you, and like I'm sorry that we were late, right? um and so I think that's what I've seen for me.
Got it.
Yeah.
I like that one. I like how you were ready to fight with him, and he was like, "No, that energy is not needed today."
Yeah, I was like, what are you doing? What are you doing in your free time? Where'd you get this information?
Reading like conflict resolution books and like meditating.
Like I guess I have no idea what that man what that man is doing, but whatever it is, it works for me.
Nice.
Yeah. Do you have anything like that you'd want to share?
Mm, I have something kind of similar. My mom had been asking for Daisy and I to do something, and we kept forgetting to do it and just kept forgetting and forgetting and forgetting. So she was having this like built up anger. And she finally just kind of like blew up and was just like, I've been asking you to do this. It's just one simple thing. Like, why can't you do it? And then she like kind of went off to do whatever she needed to do. And we're like, okay, let's let her cool down. So then I went over there and I, instead of trying to argue with her and just being really like, this isn't my fault, this could have happened, I attempted to take it from a position of taking like accountability for not having done just the simple thing that she asked me to do. And while yes, I had other things going on, I was stressed out about other things, and I wasn't in the space enough to actually get it done. There was room for me to actually do it, and that was a fault of my own. So I think that in that situation, I consciously made a point to be just hold myself accountable and not just try to blanket the situation with apologies, which I think is a lot different than the way I would have handled it before. I would have just kind of like apologized over and over and over again and then did it, and then that was it. But this time I was just like, this is why I didn't do it. I understand that I should have, and I'm sorry. And then that was kind of it. And then I think it has really helped in the way that we communicate with each other, because now she does that back to me when I have things that I'll like ask her to do, and then I keep asking her to do it and she doesn't do it. And like, obviously people are busy, so not everyone can do things on each other's schedules. So
I really like that. I really like that. And I think it's good that like you moved away just from like just giving blanket apologies. Because I think that like for me that frustrates me, just getting blanket apologies from people, because I'm like, when people just say sorry and I'm like, what are you sorry for? And then they can't even explain what they're sorry for, and I'm like,
yeah,
why are we here?
1,000%. That is 1,000% why I did that, because in my own personal life, I had been receiving a lot of apologies from people, and it was just straight apologies with no action behind it. And that's something that my dad has always said like so many times, that he doesn't like apologies. He likes seeing action. He likes seeing you like the changed behavior actually come into play. And like, I think I just got told I'm sorry one too many times. I was like, I hate this so much. I am turning into my dad. I need change. I need action. I need behaviors not being the same. So I was like, why am I just asking this of the people in my personal life? Why aren't I embodying that behavior, especially with the other important relationships I have in my life?
Right. And I think that's like so important is that like in like both situations it really does go both ways, and like whatever energy is being exuded, whoever is able to like make that tone, I think really matters. Because again, if somebody is setting the stage for the conflict and they come at me real hot, I'm probably gonna go at them real hot too,
Yeah.
even though I know these like calmer ways to engage in conflict with. I think it really makes the difference. Or like if somebody is able to like intentionally like be like, hold up, no, stop. Let's try this way. So I think that's really important. But I realized halfway through speaking that we haven't even explained what this is.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to make sure I was using the right language, and apparently conflict resolution, transformation, two different things. Because conflict resolution is when you have a conflict and you just want to resolve it, like apologies kind of thing, and then you have conflict transformation, which is where you want it like where you're not just focusing on the conflict but also on the relationship of the people who are involved, and like transforming that so that way again it doesn't happen again, but also understanding where it came from, where whether it's like an act of violence or an act of harm, and harm in terms of either emotional or physical, like where it came from, and seeing how you can continue to build from that. And I think with that it's also important to note that like with that kind of conflict transformation, it's not a one and done thing. It's one of those things where you continue to like improve on the situations either through your actions or continue to check in with each other, depending on how big the harm was. That was the quickest, I think, definition I could give on it. But I think when I think about conflict, transformation, something that helps me understand it a little bit more, I think about it within a school setting.
Okay.
And um like in a school setting, if they're just doing like conflict resolution, if they're just like responding to like punish a student, like if a student, let's say, doesn't come in with like a pencil or something like that, and then the school punishes them for not being prepared, right? And if a school were to take on like a conflict transformation kind of framework, then they would have be able to take the time to engage with the student, see, okay, why is it that you're not bringing in this pencil? Is there something else going on? Do you need pencils? Here you go. Because sometimes, because I feel like that is like a form of conflict where, because it's the school is seeing it as like a harm because the student's not doing what they're supposed to do, and then they're reacting in a punishment kind of form. And I think that can also happen in like relationships where it's like, oh, this person isn't feeling my needs in the way I need to, maybe I shouldn't be friends with them anymore. And then it's like, but you don't know what's happening in their own interpersonal lives and so on. And I think that's kind of what helps me understand what conflict transformation can do.
I've seen, I guess, different like methods of conflict transformation in education. I taught at an art school for 5 years, and I didn't know it was called that because I don't think we were naming it that way, but we were definitely using those kind of like tactics, especially like preventative measures that were put in place to already embody the students with this sort of like self-confidence and self like it's similar to what they do for like toddlers in Montessori, where they like give them a knife and they're just like, here, like we're going to teach you how to like cut these things. It's similar in that way, where they'll do these preventative measures of giving them this responsibility, giving them this but they're giving them like a title of like you're an artist, you're this, to give them that kind of like status of being an equal in order to prevent future issues of them thinking that they're like underneath us or that they're not at the same level of us, which would cause them to like just not want to, I don't know, I
Build a
can't.
relationship.
Yeah, yeah, not want to build a relationship, and then it'll be harder in the future when if and when we have like those kind of conflicts, because like there's always going to be conflicts. It's just the way that you handle those conflicts.
Exactly. And I think that's what I really like about conflict transformation is that it seeks to make sustainable change and like sustainable, I guess, peace yeah, I guess, yeah, seeks to make sustainable peace, but like while understanding like yes, there's always going to be conflict. It's like how do we prevent there from being conflict every week? Because I think in like if we're using just like the oh, I'm sorry, and then they continue to do it, that's going to be a lot of conflict happening week after week if there's nothing happening to change the relationship and make it more sustainable. Whether it's within two people, a group of people, an organization, a school, everywhere. A community. I think you described it perfectly on how school is making it sustainable. Um,
This is kind of like it's okay if you don't have an answer for it, but what would you say is a way to engage with conflict with with a community and an organization or an entity that is harming that community? Like what kind of conflict resolution would you imagine would like be in place in those kind of situations? Yeah.
Well, like now, so we see organizations throughout like the city of Chicago that do engage in this kind of model, and I've seen it mostly with like peace circles. I think Precious Blood is one that engages with that, where if somebody is doing harm within the community or if somebody is re-entering the community, they put them in a into a peace circle with those like harmed and those who are affected and kind of just discuss what has happened without again without like saying hey you caused this harm, but saying hey this is how we all feel and everyone gets an equal amount of time to be able to speak what
Mhm.
their truth is. um and so I think that's something that I've seen with like organizations like mostly like holding that space for that to be able to happen in the community. And I know there are other organizations that also do it, but that's like one of the first ones that I've um heard of slash interacted with.
Cool.
Yeah, if that makes sense.
It does make sense because I recently had the opportunity to like get posed a similar question and I gave an answer, but I don't think that it was like a good enough answer, at least to my own standards. Like I wish I could have given out a more fleshed out answer on ways in which I can like work with conflict resolution with the community and with like a larger entity that is inflicting harm onto the community, and like ways to kind of bridge that gap and find like solutions for that. So
I think another thing is now, I think some schools, some public schools are starting to introduce, I don't know what their titles are exactly, but their job, instead of having a dean, or they'll have a dean, because you know the dean typically like will enforce punishments on students like in schools. So instead of having that, they'll have somebody whose position is to play out these these actions and narratives of conflict transformation. And I cannot remember what their job titles are, but I have seen some schools that are starting to introduce that too. I think it's just like a restorative justice coordinator or something like that.
okay.
Um, so that's another example too, where they just have somebody who's like well versed in that, and they. But like I also think that it's like not enough just to like bring in a person and say like, hey, you're gonna handle the conflict now, because again, it's also requires reframing and yeah, a lot of reframing of like the organization or school.
Yeah,
Um,
a lot of like changing stuff completely on the back end, like those preventative measures I was
yeah.
talking about. Yeah.
So I guess that was like an example of how it looks like when an organization is already set up that way versus when one isn't that set up that way but is trying to make that change.
Mhm.
So
Cool. Thank you. I appreciate your answer.
I appreciate your questions. I think they're really fun. Um, and I guess earlier I mentioned peace circles a little bit. So I'll come back to that. So a peace circle, Vickie, I'm going to send you a picture of a peace circle so our audience knows what it looks like.
Okay.
But a peace circle, essentially in a peace circle, you'll have a circle keeper, so one who is kind of listening and asking like questions to start. You have those who either who have caused harm or have been affected by the harm. Um, and I think typically like a circle keeper, like within a conflict situation, they'll try to kind of meet with the people and kind of see like what it is they want and make sure they want to engage in that. But then in a peace circle, you'll have Everyone come together. They sit in a circle so you can see each other fully. So you're sitting in a circle, just in a chair, so that way nothing is blocking you. And I guess it sets up a situation where every person is able to feel vulnerable, but everyone has the same level of vulnerability. And I think that's like really important, kind of how you mentioned earlier with like if somebody is seen as more as having a higher authority, that can like make solving that conflict a little strained. And so then the circle keeper, they'll have a talking piece, and that can be just like a piece that is important to the community. I've also seen it take place where they have a talking piece and they also have everyone bring in something that has value to them, and they put it in the center so that way they have something to look at and then kind of see what everyone values as well. And so the point of the talking piece is so that everyone is able to speak, and you don't speak unless you have that talking piece, so that way there isn't any like back and forth like, oh well, this person said that, this person said that. It just kind of consecutively continuously going. And so the peacekeeper can ask questions like, okay, how are you feeling at the beginning of this? And then everyone will go, and if you have the talking piece and you don't want to speak, that's fair, you keep it for as long as you want and then pass it on. And then they'll ask questions. I think I did one of these recently, and one of the questions that I asked was like, okay, how did X situation make you feel? Another one was, hey, how do you think X situation could have been solved for next time? What is it that you need to move forward? So not just saying like, oh, this person needs to apologize to this person, but it's like, okay, what do you personally need from which person in order to move forward? Like, do you need trust? Do you need, if you need an apology, that's fine. If you need someone to check in on you, that's fine. And so it's just kind of like these questions to see kind of like what happened, what can be done, how do we move forward, and then just kind of like a closing out, like how are we feeling now within this model. If possible, again, you want to be able to check in with each of those participants and see if another one is needed.
I was going to say that I really like that portion of it where it says that like what do you need from this other person to move on, because I think oftentimes when you have a conflict with someone, you, at least in my experience, I don't leave feeling like I've gotten anything out of it. I leave feeling like the same amount of anger, the same amount of hurt, and just kind of feeling like what was the point of this argument, like why didn't get anything from it. So I think I really enjoy hearing that that is a part of the structure, because I think it's important to get some sort of closure, because I think it takes longer to heal from the conflict if you have to do all that healing alone. And I think it could be beneficial to do it. You still have to do some alone, but like it's good to get some whatever kind of recognition from that other person who had done the hurt.
Yeah. And I think it's really important because again, we all have different needs and we all have different kind of like just like ways of feeling acknowledged. And like for me personally, it's not an apology. For some people it is. Everyone's gonna have different needs based on what's happening. And again, within like a peace circle and with any conflict transformation, you don't want to point fingers. You don't want to like, you want to be able to speak within like I statements, which is a community boundary you can make at the beginning, which I forgot to mention. So I really enjoy that aspect of like setting up those like community boundaries. So it's not like really like a set of rules that like the peacekeeper isn't going to come in and like be like, hey, here are the set of rules, everyone follow them, but it's something that everyone gets to make. And typically on that, I've always seen like use I statements, like say like, instead of saying, hey, you hurt me, you want to be able to say, hey, I felt hurt or I felt upset, because I guess at the end of the day we're all accountable for our own actions / feelings.
That's interesting, because I feel that in arguments that I've had with individuals who I view as being very arrogant, and frustrate me is when they say things like, well, of course I did this to hurt you, but you're in control of your own emotions and you made yourself feel that way. That always irritates me to my core, because I'm like, you're not wrong. Like, I did make myself feel this way from that situation, but that doesn't mean that you didn't cause this like hurt or this like whatever. So it's interesting that you say that, because that immediately it triggered in my mind that like, yeah, like just thinking back on that kind of argument that I've had with people who I've never been able to resolve conflict with, because we've always got stuck in that place of them saying like, I'm not in control of how you react. I'm just in control of the way I react, and this is how I'm reacting. So that's on you. And I'm like, it's not on me.
Very interesting. I hadn't thought about that,
Yeah.
about how I guess that can be like weaponized against someone, and just kind of like said like, oh, whoa, you're in
Yeah.
because I was thinking of it more like in a sense like if you're assigning blame to a person in that situation, if everyone's assigning blame to like that person, how it can kind of feel like again ostracizing and kind of like feel like an attack on a person. So then instead of feeling like everyone's equal within the situation, it feels like, oh, we're here because of you. um but I guess that's where it comes in like those other pieces of the circle where the conversation continues to flow. And again, I think everyone has the opportunity to be able to speak on what their experience was, and then since everyone goes, there's like a full picture to it. And I think I've rarely ever seen, I don't think I've ever seen like that back and forth like, oh, I have the talking piece now, so I want to address what so and so said. You're wrong. Like,
Uh,
both again centered on the self.
yeah.
But dang, that sucks.
Yeah, so I don't know if you have any words to that on how to deal with a conflict with a situation like that.
Okay, so I think I don't remember when this was. I think I want to say it was like a month or two ago, where I did have that kind of feeling, and then I was like, hold up, this does not feel productive to me. And I said that. I said, this does not feel productive to me. We're just gonna go back and forth. And I don't want to do that. I want us to be able to get to a point where like we're able to actually talk about like what happened. And I want you to be able to at least like try to understand what I'm saying, and I'll do the same for you. And so I will very in those situations, I'll just say, hey, for me, this isn't feeling productive. And I don't know if that's like the best or or the most correct thing to do, but for me that is what helps me to just be able to call it out and say, I feel like we're just going back and forth, and it's like something's got to give.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, because I'll do that, but in an entirely less mature way. I'll just walk away. I'm the queen of, if I don't like a situation, then I am gone. I have no issue just like walking out of the room and like just never speaking to you again. Because I'm like, you are never gonna understand what you did affected me, and now you're even saying that it is my fault for getting mad about this. What is the point of having this conversation? What is the point of even interacting with you, because obviously you don't value my feelings or any of my perspective. So I'm just like, insert the gif of the guy just like doing this and disappearing.
I think that's very fair and valid, because I think at the end of the day it comes to how intentional you want to be with that person, and whether or not that is a relationship you want to be able to continue with that person. So just because you're having a conflict with someone doesn't mean you have to go and put in all this energy and rebuild that relationship, because sometimes it just isn't for you.
Yeah.
So I think I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's really big on like boundary setting, you know.
Yeah, you are pretty big on boundary setting. I've initiated some boundaries with other people that I don't think that I would have felt valid enough to set if I hadn't had to talk to you beforehand about like, does this make sense? And you're like, hell yeah, that's a boundary, bruh. And I'm like, okay. Okay.
I'm happy you say that, because I think like a few years ago I would like people would ask me like, oh, what are your boundaries? And I'd be like, I don't know, I don't have any. And it's like, come on, girl, like you do. Like one of my biggest boundaries right now is like after 9, I'm not gonna be doing work. Like I'm gonna be on TikTok. I'm gonna keep sending you stuff on TikTok, but using my brain though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mindless scrolling. Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's just like I forgot where we were. Oh,
Boundaries.
boundaries. Yeah, I think that's also really big. It's like whether or not you're gonna want to engage with this person, if it's like a one-on-one, if you're gonna want to engage with that person and like move forward with that situation, because again, I think it requires understanding from both persons, and it requires like mutual respect, especially like when dealing with like a one-on-one situation, because sometimes people won't pick up from the tone that you have,
Yeah.
right? Because sometimes you could be coming in and you could be like, okay, like this isn't what I need, can we like tone it down a little bit, and they're still coming at you hot, and it's like, what do you do in that situation?
Yeah.
And I think for me, I know if I'm coming in hot and then somebody starts responding to me in the lower tone, I'm gonna be like, okay, maybe chill out, because why are you putting all this energy in? But I know not everyone is going to do that. So I guess at the end of the day, like that's a really good question. Like how do you tell someone like, hey, you're not really being respectful? Like, well, I guess you just say that. I would just say that. I'd be like, hey, you're not respecting me right now.
Yeah.
Like let's send it back, or maybe just even say like, this energy right now that we're creating is not beneficial to me and it's not making me feel good, so let's revisit this on another day when we've had time to talk about it. And I think it's really valid to be able to say, hey, I can't talk about this right now because I know that my response won't be appropriate, and I'll do that, but I won't communicate it to people. I'll just like leave and then I'll come back. I'm like, I'm ready to talk now. And it's like, but then I didn't say anything to let the person know, which is also, I think, something I can work on, because it can also be damaging, um, to just like leave the situation and be like, oh, I'll come back later and discuss it. But then the other person's like, bro, she just did. Like, you're not going to talk? You're not going to be friends anymore?
My mom is the queen of one, setting boundaries, and two, doing that where she is like, anything I say right now will not be productive because it's coming from anger. So I'd rather we don't speak about it right now. And then she'll like walk away and like cool off, maybe like the next day or like a couple hours later, then we'll actually sit down and have a conversation about it. But I didn't know that that was a boundary that like she was setting, and I didn't know that that was an actual like nice thing to do. I used to hate it as a child because I'm so much of the person, I'm so reactive, where I'm like, if we have an issue, we need to solve it now. Because if we don't solve it now, it's going to fester and then it's going to get worse. And I'm like, no, time makes things better. Like,
Yeah.
the more time you get to sit with it and understand the situation, like, it's going to get better. So I think that's something with age that I've learned. Yeah.
I think for me in those situations, what I dislike is if somebody tells me like, "Hey, I need a moment," and then they try to engage with me outside of that conflict. That's typically what makes me upset, because I'm like, I don't want to move forward with this
Hmm.
until we have resolved this, because if not, I'm going to be thinking about it. And again, that's the sustainable piece, because if you're not addressing it and if you're just letting it like, oh, we'll just forget about it, like it'll be whatever, I'm still going to have it in the back of my head, and I'm still going to like I'll snap at someone and I'll be like, it'll be like months later and they'll like do the same action. I'll be like, oh, just like you did on November 8th and March 16th.
I'm gonna remember that.
Yeah. And I think that's something else that I've learned. It's like, if you're still bringing up past situations with the person, it means that you have not handled that conflict and you have not seen like change in it. And so that's something else that I'm also like learning, is like, okay, if I haven't moved forward from it, that means I need to like take time and engage with this person and have a conversation about why I still feel this way,
Yeah.
even though it's been months. And that I think is really hard too, because I don't want to like feel annoying for, because like, yeah, we've already discussed it, we've already had like our conflict negotiation, whatever. And then it's been months later and I'm still not cool with the situation. And it's like, okay, I need to talk about it again then.
Yeah. And I think that's hard because it does feel like you're being like the one who can't let go. Because I know I've had to do that with my sister where we have a conflict, it feels resolved at the time, and then like I'm either not changing my behavior or she's either not changing her behavior, and then it gets brought up again, and then it feels like we're nagging each other, which just feels like an entirely other issue. And that like line between like trying to resolve the conflict and then feeling like the conflict is like you're just perpetuating it and you want to keep the conflict going is such a fine line, and it's so hard because then Like it can either get into oh, this conflict is finally resolved kind of territory, or it can move into all you want to do is fight. Like you don't want to solve this issue. You just are really combative type of thing. Like,
And like, but like what you said, like with like the situation of your sister, it's like someone isn't changing their action. And so it's like, why is this still happening? And like, how do we actually move forward? Because like, yes, we can talk about it and say, hey, I'm gonna start doing this now, but it's like, okay, what work are you doing for yourself afterwards to fulfill those to fulfill what you have said, right? um and so it's ongoing work, and it sucks because in a perfect world it would just be like, hey, that hurt me. Oh, okay, but I'll never do it again, and then the person just never does it again in a
yeah,
perfect world. But we don't live in a perfect world because we have so many emotions, we have so many reactions, and we have our own personal lives that are impacted the way we handle conflict with other people, because sometimes the way I respond to people has nothing to do with them, and sometimes it just has to do with me, and that's messed up, and it's something that needs to be worked on.
yeah, that is a very similar issue that causes about 90% of my arguments with my family. It's 100% something that's going on in my own personal life with someone in my personal life or school. And I'm just like, I'm going to rage and bitch out on everyone now. That's not good.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
here we are human, and we are trying to learn the best ways that we can engage with people and like make people feel. I think at the end of the day, for me, it's like I want this person to feel like they matter to me and that I respect them. So what can I do to allow for that to happen?
I want to thank everybody for listening to us again for a 7th week. This is 7 weeks. It's very exciting and I appreciate it. And I appreciate this conversation. I feel like I haven't been able to talk about conflict in this kind of way. And I really value all that you've taught me and all the stuff that I didn't know were forms of conflict resolution or that other term that you used.
Transformation.
Yes.
Conflict transformation. Yeah.
Yes. And it's cool that I have a name for it now because I feel like nowadays and personally, I really value being able to name things. It just feels like I can like wrap my head around it. But then at the same time, it's also really cool not naming things. I don't know. It's a conundrum that I'm working out that's not related to this, but I think is cool. So, yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that's been a theme for us lately, just being able to name actions and things that are happening. And I agree. I really enjoyed this conversation. I haven't been able to. I think lately I've been feeling like I haven't been engaging with this kind of work, but it's like, yes, I do. I just do it without like talking about it or like continuing to learn on it. Which I guess it's kind of like good, but that also means that I'm not like intentionally thinking about it. And so this brought me back into a space to be able to do that. So very nice.
Um, I will see you all next week. Thank you. Bye.